Hello, and welcome to Cybersecurity is Everyone's Business in the Workplace webinar with John Nye, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at CynergisTek. This next slide shows you a bit about John's background. He is a professional hacker, and since he was 12 years old, hasn't wanted to do anything else. He spent years in the military doing what he loves and has numerous certifications in cybersecurity. I will turn it over to John now, who began just a few seconds before the recording started. Enjoy.
Different things matter, why good security habits are important. It's really hard to force yourself to do something that's inconvenient when you don't understand why. And so that's what I really hope to get through to you today. So we're going to continue on here. So are we secure is really important. Major security breaches are basically a daily occurrence these days. It's no longer an enterprise issue. It's not just the enterprise that's being affected, individuals are. It's very personal. We can look at just 3 major breaches that we've all heard about and are hearing about in the news every day. We got Anthem, which happened in 2015. More than 27 million healthcare records were taken. Then the Office of Personnel Management, 21.5 million records were taken. I had a top secret security clearance when I was in the military, and I know the kind of information that OPM had on me, and they know these people could recreate me. They could probably clone me from the information they have from OPM. And then now, more recently, we've had Equifax with 143 million so far admitted to records. And I don't believe that number as far as I could throw the whole company of Equifax. I think it's a lot more. They're not telling us everything yet. But the point of this is that these issues are not just theoretical. They're not just something you see in the news. These are things that are actually affecting everyone. They affect you, they affect your spouse, they affect your loved ones, your family, your friends, and that is very important to understand and keep in mind as as we go through this. So it helps to put a face on disruption. The one thing to keep in mind with threats, cyber threats, or attacks that we're seeing these days is that the vast majority of the attacks are not technical in nature or have a very small technical aspect. It's almost always taking advantage of the humans that are using the computers. And more recently, it's moved further into the realm of disruption, which is just causing problems like ransomware. So if you look at the non-technical aspects, it still has a staggering effect. So each breach costs hundreds of thousands of dollars from an IT standpoint, from a technical standpoint. And we all know that, and we hear those numbers all the time. But what we have to think about is that all the costs of a breach and the disruption that can be caused are not always considered or attributed correctly to that issue. So we look at things like disruption in care, which with just recently, Nuance is it something that a lot of healthcare organizations use to do dictation, and they had major ransomware issue, and it caused a lot of disruptions in care, and it broke a bunch of workflows for physicians that were attempting to just do their normal logs. So something that happened to a provider to these healthcare organizations has caused them major disruptions. And then ransomwares, we've seen multiple hospitals be shut down for days and weeks, and that's time that people can't be cared for, or they have to go somewhere else. It affects communications, and this can be done in a lot of ways. We've seen attacks where communications are jammed, where they can actually jam even like cell phone signals, make it difficult for people to communicate. They can mess with email, all those kind of things. When a hospital closes for 2 weeks, how many of those people are actually coming into work? Probably mostly the IT staff. So you got lost wages, lost hours, overtime. I mean, the expenses that go into an attack in the modern day, where IT is pivotal to every aspect of an organization, it really has a major impact. So if you look at that, already it's exceeded $500,000 for a simple breach just in technical expenses. You can easily double that with these other things that we're looking at. And this is why it's everybody's business, and everybody should care So top security risks, especially in healthcare that we run into, um, these are important to understand. Theft and loss. So nearly half of all breaches involve some form of theft or loss of a device or property. If you look, and I'll show you guys a timeline in just a moment, but if you look at the past breaches, you'll see, especially in the beginning, they were almost all to do with theft or loss of a laptop or a hard drive, or in one case, a server. Uh, so that is important, but there's also a lot of where people, just steal things, and that happens a lot. So insider abuse also ties into that, and that's where breaches in healthcare are carried out by knowledgeable insiders, and they do it for their own financial gain. Insider abuse means that they're doing it knowing what they're doing is wrong. You also run into, and probably more often than theft, loss, or insider abuse, is unintentional actions. And that's anything from a mistake, like accidentally sending the wrong thing to the wrong people or the wrong facts, but it can also be clicking on the wrong link. Uh, there's a bunch of things that can happen, or you've been tricked. And then we run into cyber attacks, which are still, vast majority of cyber attacks are not technical in nature. They use phishing, ransomware, things like that that are tricking people to do things for them. It's not that these attackers had some tricky, nefarious way to get into the network through a backdoor or a vulnerability. They got someone inside the organization to click on a link for them, and that's how they got in. And so the technical aspect is pretty minimal. It's actually substantially more important these days that an attacker who really wants to make an impact, even though it's a bad impact, be good at manipulating people, social engineering, which we'll talk about quite a bit. So if you look at the cyber threat spectrum, and I'll make this brief, I know you guys are not technical, but it's really important, or a lot of you are not, it's really important to understand the various pillars of the cyber threats that are out there. And if you look all the way to the left, we start on hacktivism. And this is essentially groups such as Anonymous that have decided, for whatever reason, an organization is that it is bad. Children's Hospital in Boston is an example, and that was when they got attacked by Anonymous specifically because they were doing something Anonymous didn't like with a child who was from another country. So we've seen hacktivism actually affecting healthcare in real life. Crime, as we already know, affects healthcare in real life. The big reason for this is if I was a bad guy, I could go steal 1 million credit card numbers pretty easily, but that's only going to make me $1 million at best, because they're worth about $1 a piece if they're good credit cards. Whereas I can take healthcare records and sell them for $300, $400, $500 a piece. So we begin to see, crime is growing, and has noticed that healthcare has two big advantages for them. The two advantages that criminals see in attacking healthcare is that a lot of healthcare organizations are still a little behind where some of the bigger corporate enterprises are as far as their technical security controls are concerned. And the other is that in healthcare, all of the people, and this is a wonderful thing, are there to help. And so it's really hard for people to be untrusting, and that is a problem we run into a lot. Insider threat, that's a big one. Any of you who've worked in a pharmacy, insider threat is a big deal, because in pharmacies there's often insiders who are trying to deal with taking drugs that are controlled. But we see insider threat on all ends, all sides of the spectrum. People who are having financial issues and have decided they could probably get away with doing something illegal. And then we run into these last three. So espionage, terrorism, and warfare. We have, up until just recently, not seen any or very, very little impact in healthcare. But as was shown with WannaCry, which was a ransomware attack that was perpetuated against another nation by a nation state, so warfare, digital warfare and espionage, and that did spread. And it affected, in the UK especially, but also in the United States, it affected healthcare significantly. So we see that we have a large spectrum of threats that healthcare is facing. And it's important that everybody knows about these so that everybody can be aware and help make things better. This timeline actually shows the evolution, the evolving threat landscape. Excuse me. So in the very beginning, you'll see these first several show, stolen hard drives, stolen tapes, computer theft, lost computers. Excuse me. So for many years, that was the only way that breaches happened because most attackers, especially the criminal sort, didn't see healthcare as a big monetary advantage to them. And so most of it was things that had walked away. And that was how most of the breach reporting was happening. And then shortly after that, about 2013, it started moving into hacking, and we saw the Boston Children's hacktivism with Anonymous, and we started seeing Anthem and many other, and these are just in healthcare, attacks that were specifically to do with hacking, which means that a group of sophisticated, technically knowledgeable attackers targeted a specific organization and used flaws in their security to gain access and steal the information. That's a time-consuming process. And unless you're a nation state with virtually unlimited resources and phenomenal teams of people, it's very, very hard to pull that off in a way that has any sort of return on investment. And so that's where we've seen in the last few years this major shift over to disruption. And that's where we see things like what's called a distributed denial of service attack. And that's where we're looking at tens of thousands of packets being pointed at a specific organization or an IP. Or we see ransomware, extortion attacks. All of these things have grown exponentially in the last few years, where we see more and more theft and purposeful disruption, because you can say, I'm just going to keep your systems offline until you give us money, and it often works. And it doesn't take nearly as much effort. And there's a lot of ability out there to actually purchase this stuff, so you don't even need technical know-how. You can pay someone who has the technical know-how to do that part for you. You tell them who you're targeting. So it can be a scary world out there. This slide I like to put in here because you see cybercrime damage costs will exceed $6 trillion by 2021. That's what it said in CSO magazine. If you look as of the end of last year, the total national spending in the US on healthcare was about $3.2 trillion. So the amount we're investing in totality in healthcare is less than what cybercrime damages are costing or will be costing in just a few years. So it's really important to know all this and to consider all of these issues. At the end of 2016, 99% of hospitals had EHR. Now that was forced, as we know, everyone had to switch over to EHR. But the fact that all the hospitals have all of their stuff on electronic records now means it's that much easier for an attacker to disrupt it. And those paper records that were in the basement are slowly disappearing. They're going to places where we can't reach them. So when somebody locks down a database of EHR records and nobody can access any patient records, that's a major disruption. 90% of healthcare organizations suffered at least one data breach in the last 2 years. And it says the average cost is $2.2 million. These breaches happen, the high costs happen because of a lack of awareness and a lack of preparedness in getting ready and having the entire organization watching. It's really important to make sure everyone knows that if they see something they're not sure about, they should be questioning it, not just accepting it because it came from a doctor or somebody who is in authority over them. In 2016, there were nearly 300 reported breaches involving inappropriate access by an insider or business partner. And this means that your business associates and people that work inside your organization, are absolutely a possibility as a threat too. And so if you see suspicious things happening in any aspect, it's important to think about. And actually, Carrie, you could put up the poll question if you don't mind. I know I actually skipped over the first one. You could go ahead and do the second. And if you all don't mind answering that real quick. And as you're answering this, so with our organization, we partner with a lot of healthcare organizations and a lot of large ones. And one of the biggest problems we see is a lack of resources to actually address these issues. So many organizations are fully aware of having the problems and fully aware of vulnerabilities in their networks. They're aware that they would fail miserably at a physical penetration test, but they don't do it. In fact, I've ran into more than one organization that has told me specifically, because of HIPAA and high-tech requirements, if you know about a vulnerability and have it recorded, then you can be in trouble for negligence. So many companies will actually not even do these scans. It's a head in the sand approach, and eventually that's going to cost them. So you can pay now or you can pay later.
Okay, John, we have most everyone has responded, and 30% say yes, 26% say no, and 43% say not sure.
Sure. Very good. And those are not surprising numbers at all. Like I said, we see this quite frequently as an issue. So one thing to look at here is where the data is in your network and in your organization. So if you go on the internet and you do a Google search, and even though you get 300 billion results, you're only looking at a small fraction of what is actually on the network, on the internet as a whole. So Google, wikis and Bing, that's your surface web, and that's what you can search and what is considered to be indexed. And so what it looks for. The deep web is what you deal with at work every day. That is your records. Your medical records is a good example, but anything that has a login to access, it's restricted access information. It's still part of the network. It's still part of the internet. It's just the deeper part of the internet. And this is the information that attackers want to get. And then we hear about, I'm sure, on the news all the time, the dark web or Tor. This was actually initially designed to just allow an anonymity amongst people who were either dissidents or journalists. Often spies would use it, a lot of governments. But of course, it being the internet and anybody being able to do anything they want, and then the dark web being even more so because you're anonymized on there, it has become a haven for illegal information, drug trafficking, there's a lot of things you don't want to see on the dark web as well. But that's where a lot of this information ends up that gets stolen for sale. So you can go to the dark web, and when I was doing my undergrad, I did a project in which I was talking about the dark web and how easy it was to find a specific person's information for sale on there, and was able to go on and purchase my own credit card number for $2 from a website on the dark web. And I mean, I knew the credit card was canceled, and they even gave me a guarantee that it would work. It's pretty scary what's out there. And so it's why it's so important to be aware. It's important to keep yourself and your family all safe. So the stakes are much higher. If you think for just 1 minute about what information you have on your phone, it's staggering. You check your bank account, you check your emails, your personal emails, your work emails, your conversations with your loved ones and with your workmates, etc. The list goes on, and that thing is with you at all times. The amount of information that we have that is digitally accessible today is exponentially more than it was even 10 years ago. And the amount of systems that we have connected is also growing exponentially, as we see with IoT and biomedical devices. So the stakes are just growing along with all that. And that's where we have things like cyber extortion. And that's, we will continue to make your network unusable until you give us money. Cyber espionage is straight up spying. hacktivism, targeted attacks, cyber terrorism, advanced persistent attacks and malware, and nation states. We're going to kind of go into depth in each of these because I want you all to understand the motivations behind each of these a little bit, and it helps you understand why it's important for you to be aware of this. So malware. This is something we hear about almost every day in the news. It's a very big deal these days, and everyone agrees. AV systems, which are only moderately effective against malware in the modern day, they recognize less than 50% of malicious traffic that goes across the network. Malware is specifically designed to avoid or fool antivirus, but it does help you with the known stuff, and it is certainly worth having an AV running on your personal computer. The number of new variants. So each time a type of malware is made, it's similar to an actual real-life virus in that it has a very specific signature that can be then targeted and watched for. Well, it doesn't take very much effort to change that signature of malware. So that's why we see something like a number of 400 million variants of malware in a single year, because every single criminal out there is going to make their own version of whichever malware is hot at this time of year. And, whichever one everyone's looking at, crypto locker or whatever it happens to be. So, we're seeing the level of sophistication and the amount of variance in malware attacks is growing incredibly fast. The number of zero-day attacks, and a zero-day attack is a vulnerability that has been recently discovered, has not been patched. So if for an example, if I found a vulnerability in Windows that allowed me to bypass authentication and log in without anyone's password, I can tell Microsoft about this, and Microsoft will move forward to repair it. Between the time I discover this and the time that Microsoft repairs it is considered a zero-day attack, or an O-day attack, as you might hear some people say. And we're seeing these increase exponentially. Part of the reason we saw so many in the last year is because certain government organizations were holding on to them, and they eventually got released to the public, and that's actually what allowed some of the worst ransomware attacks we had in the last year to perpetuate, was these zero-day flaws that had actually been known for years, and they were being kept secret so that they could use them to access systems. And hackers are more often, or attackers are more often, using machine learning technology to enhance their chances of not getting caught. So in other words, they use algorithms, and they use the power of the actual computers to ensure that they're going to beat other machine learning that's running with antivirus. So it's basically a perfect storm that's brewing, and our nation's public and private infrastructure is absolutely under attack. It's under attack today, and it has been for some time. And we only hear and see about the ones that get found out about. The best of the best that are out there, the nation states who have their elite groups, they don't get caught, or they don't get caught till many years later. So they've already gotten what they need. So cyber espionage, this is what the nation states are doing. It's being carried out by nation state actors, and usually for political purposes. So this is where, and I think this is really important for everyone to understand. If you look at Anthem, OPM, and Equifax, all three of those breaches are, as of right now, attributed to the Chinese nation state. So China has stolen all of those records. Those records are not for sale on the dark web. Nobody is selling them. If I had 153 million or 143 million records of people's credit that I could sell for $1 a piece, and I was in it to make money, they would be for sale today, because it's $143 million. To a nation state like China, they don't care about the money, And they actually probably don't care about 90% of the people's information that's in there. They care about the people who they're targeting, which are probably government officials. Anthem handles most government healthcare claims. OPM deals with security clearances, and of course Equifax has anybody who has credit information. So they can get a lot of info about their targets. So that's where we start looking at cyber espionage as something that really is affecting us on a daily basis. They're also targeting industrial control systems, and these are little electronic devices that control the flow of electricity or the flow of water in municipal electricity systems and plumbing systems. And that we are seeing disruption in this too. And there's a lot of fear out there at the moment for a lot of our critical infrastructure, our power plants and what have you, because these things are all designed to run with connected devices similar to biomed, and they have a similar issue that biomedical devices have, is that they're expensive and they're meant to last for a very long time. But that goes against basic tenets of IT, where things should be replaced regularly so that they're not easily vulnerable. So these are some of the issues we look at with cyber espionage. Hacktivism, as we talked about earlier, excuse me, apologize. We're seeing this, and we see breaches. So the U.S. government databases, Edward Snowden breached those in 2013, and he released hundreds of classified documents. We have had universities getting attacked and sensitive information coming out. As we talked about briefly earlier, Anonymous attacked the Boston Children's Hospital and Hurley Medical Systems Center. They did this because they didn't agree with how they were treating a patient. And they caused major disruption in these. And then pro-ISIS groups have attacked hospitals' websites, defaced them. So hacktivism is essentially people who aren't getting paid to do this, but are doing it for their own moral beliefs. And it's usually not good, but we're seeing this more and more in healthcare. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Now, targeted attacks these are multiple motivations in the sense that this is sometimes a nation state, sometimes it's a group like Anonymous, sometimes it's just an attacker who decided they don't like you, somebody who's good at hacking, they don't like your business, or the person that's getting targeted. And finally, we run into things like other organizations who are maybe not as moral as yours, who are also targeting. So we run into this, and this is where you've probably seen the term in the news, APT, Advanced Persistent Threats. This is essentially a highly sophisticated attack that is designed specifically and only for one target. So if I'm doing a penetration test where I have free reign to do anything I want, which does sometimes happen, an APT is actually a really good option, is to put together a special set of malware that specifically targets that organization and looks for things that they use. And finding the details you need to put that together in public sources is shockingly easy. Between LinkedIn, Facebook, and job postings, we can usually figure out what systems you're using, what kinds of badges are in place, figure out who's in charge of what, which allow highly customized attacks. If somebody is targeting and doing an advanced persistent attack like this, chances are they're going to be successful. The key and the thing that's most important, especially for everyone in the organization, is being aware and helping to catch these as early as possible. As you see in that second bullet, most of these attacks go undetected for a long time. 280 days, I think, is being pretty generous. I think it's often longer, especially if it's a persistent attack from an advanced and highly sophisticated attacker. They can stay hidden for a very long time while siphoning data out. And it's in most cases when this happens, the person who finds it is usually not a technical person. It's somebody who said, this is weird, why is this file here? Or, why did this email not go through? Something didn't seem right and they said something. So it's like that old saying, if you see something, say something. It's very important. And I promise you, your IT security would rather you go to them with something that may be an issue that turns out not to be, than ignore something that turns out to be some major breach where thousands of medical records are being exfiltrated from your network. Um, these attacks will often incorporate phishing, which means that they send emails to you that appear to be legitimate but are specifically used to trick you into clicking on something that will allow them to access your network. They use 0 days, as we talked about before, and ransomware has become a very big part of it. So nation states, they set a high bar for what sophisticated cyber attacks are, but we're starting to see that the gangs, the cyber gangs, which are often based in I'm going to say Eastern Europe, you still run into these guys are getting much, much, much more sophisticated, and they're quickly catching up with the nation states. At least what we know the nation states are doing. Of course, we probably know what they were doing 3 years ago, not today. But they're improving their tactics too, and they're also realizing how much money there is in healthcare. So, 5 years ago, when I was dealing with financial industry almost exclusively, we were worried about this stuff. Now it's time for healthcare to start being more concerned about it. So most of these attacks, almost every attack, is successful because of taking human nature and turning it against us. This is kind of my, my soapbox, if you will, in the last couple of years as I've moved away from doing the technical penetration testing every day into looking at the broader issues that we are facing in cybersecurity. More and more, I'm realizing that the technical solutions we've done what we can do. I mean, obviously we need to keep working and continue to keep that going. What we're missing is the human element. There is no computer that exists except that people need to use it for a reason. And all of those computers are accessed by people, and people can be fooled. They can be scared, they can be tricked, and you can use greed. I mean, there's a lot of things that people have been using for millennia. Con artists or confidence artists for millennia have been using these tactics, and in the last couple of decades, they have moved over into the digital realm. It makes it very easy because I don't need to be face to face with my victim or the person I'm targeting. I can reach them through the internet. I could reach them through chat. I could call them on a phone, and it's almost easier to fool them. I don't need to put on a costume or anything. And it's really this particular area, I think, is the biggest gap that we have in security. IT as an industry from the very beginning has had a very strong focus on the digital side. Obviously, they've had a strong focus on computers. Well, if you look at technology in a more general sense, some of the technologies that have changed the world in the past have been things like plumbing and electricity. Those are two that anyone can easily see the issue they were made to solve. Plumbing was put there because we all have to use the restroom and we want to take a shower. Lighting was put there because we all want to see at night. We want to see in the dark. Everyone has that problem. Computers, when they were first invented, were invented to solve a problem that most people don't or will never have, which is to crack codes or do math really, really fast. And, the people who worked on them, they realized quickly that this could, there was ways to use computers in virtually every industry across the globe, and they've done a phenomenal job of interjecting IT into every aspect. But I think that from the very beginning, there's been a disconnect between the people that are using the systems and the people that are making the systems. They're not considering that human aspect enough. And that's why social engineering is so effective and why we can so easily turn that against people. So social engineering, and that's actually I want to talk a bit more about social engineering. This is something I love to actually get to go do for real assessments. And when you get to do this in a real hospital setting, it is, especially the first time, it is scary. It is absolutely breathtakingly scary. I've gone into, very large hospitals that have put incredible amount of efforts into their physical security, into ensuring that the NICU can't be accessed, the pharmacy is locked down, all those kinds of things. I have tested over a dozen hospitals and walked into every single pharmacy without ever being questioned. I have walked out of every hospital with multiple laptops in my arms. I have gotten into server rooms without question. I've walked into every ICU, NICU, emergency department, everywhere. And at the closest I've ever come to being questioned was, who are you? Showed them my fake badge, and they said, okay, fine. And it's not because they're terrible at their jobs or terrible at security. It's because it's really hard to say no or to question people, especially when they look like they know what they're doing. But it's really important that we trust but verify. So if somebody you haven't seen before comes in and says, I need to look at your computer real quick, ask them or call your IT department. They're not going to be offended. If anything, they're going to give you kudos for doing the right thing. So, social engineering is really important. Recently, about 8 months ago, we had the shadow brokers actually released a whole bunch of weaponized exploits or 0 days from the government that they had pulled from the NSA. They're continuing to release these files, but some of the more recent ones have had some phenomenally useful tools for attackers and for the good guys like me. We're using this stuff as well. But we've found vulnerabilities in Microsoft, in Cisco, in Juniper. And that list could go on for the rest of this talk if we wanted, for the amount of unpatched vulnerabilities that they were sitting on. And we don't know what other governments and private organizations are sitting on as well. As soon as one of these tools is in the public, anyone can use it. And so that's how we run into these new versions of ransomware that are so effective, like WannaCry, where everyone had a lot of issues with that. Or NotPetya, which was another one that we saw, and these all relied on these 0-day or brand new vulnerabilities that had been released specifically because the shadow brokers were giving out all this information that they had obtained, most likely illegally, from the government. So cyber extortion, which is using money or using embarrassment to get money out of people, we first started seeing this in 2005, where it was the CryptoLocker ransomware. That was the first effective ransomware that was out there. The people who made that made a significant amount of money. I think it was $23 million estimated in the first year of running that. So it quickly grew into a large and very profitable criminal enterprise to do cyber extortion specifically. There's a lot of technical terms on here like asymmetric keys and industrial strength, private, public. What's important here to know is that they're keeping their stuff private. The way that they are locking your information away from you is virtually unbreakable. It's almost impossible for somebody to come in and bypass that. And they use things like privacy enabling services like Tor to use payments. So the payments come through in Bitcoins, which are mostly untraceable as well. And they don't care about the target. These are not like an advanced persistent attack. If an attacker decides to do a malware attack, their goal is to get literally as many people as they can. And they charge each one of those people a couple $100, and that adds up pretty quickly for the ones who pay. The people who didn't back up their information or desperately need it back and are willing to pay. And these can come through malvertising, which I know is literally a made-up word, but I didn't make it up, I promise. Somebody else did. But malvertising is essentially where attackers are able to hijack the advertising networks, such as Google AdWords or Facebook, and they will put special code into the ads that pop up telling you to go buy, go to Chili's today or whatever it's telling you. And they'll hijack it and put special code into that Java that will then inject malware into your computer. Ransomware in most cases. Email is probably the most common way, and then social engineering. We also see attacks come through, through email. We've also seen them come through SMS messages. We've seen them come through text messaging, chats, message boards. It's really important, especially in your day-to-day life, that if you're ever going to click on something that you haven't clicked on before, you don't know specifically what it is, just think twice. Just thinking twice will save you a world of hurt and a lot of trouble. So the United States is by far the largest target, by the way, as also. So us being here in the US does put us in the crosshairs. And part of that is that healthcare in the United States is not hurting for money, or it's bringing in a lot of money. There's trillions of dollars that are flowing, so the criminals want to get to it. And we also are, I think, one of the only nations that has a commercial healthcare organization or industry. So there's a lot more money floating around in ours than any others. And that's why we have to be concerned and be very vigilant and aware of what's going on around us. So we look at the targeting of healthcare and critical infrastructure have not always been put into the same group. Critical infrastructure for decades has been things like dams and power plants and things along those lines that are and roads, the infrastructure that allows us to continue having commerce and live in a first world country instead of a third world country. Well, in more recent years, we as a nation have come to terms with the fact that healthcare too is part of our critical infrastructure. And we're seeing better investment into it. One incredible example and thing that just blows my mind is what happened in Houston just a few weeks ago. They had the worst flooding they'd seen in, some people have said 100 years, but not a single hospital in the entire city closed down because they all realized how important it was that they stayed open long ago and invested what they needed to put in submarine doors and seal off every bit of the hospital's buildings that were potentially or had the potential to be reached by floodwaters. And by doing that, when the hurricane came through and flooded the whole city, every hospital was able to stay open and continue to provide care through the entire time. And that was incredibly important, as I'm sure many of you are aware, and we want that to continue. So it's important that critical infrastructure and that healthcare be recognized as critical infrastructure. And the attackers are realizing it, and we need to realize it too. It's very important. All right, so real quick on this one, ubiquitous is the new paradigm, and this is essentially that we are all connected in 10 million ways, not just one. In 1999, I had a laptop or a desktop, and you probably did too. And then we had a TV that was connected to the cable line. It was not connected to a network. Today, we're all carrying a smartphone in our pocket. Most of our TVs are network connected. Plus, and this I see in almost every hospital I've ever assessed, they use IP-based closed caption or closed circuit television cameras for surveillance. IoT is everywhere, and IoT is devices like smart light bulbs, smart coffee makers, smart fans. Everyone is on social media. All of these things on this list on the screen right now are ingrained into our lives at this point. Every single one of these is also an attack vector that an attacker can use. So as we become more connected, as our devices become more intelligent, as they become more interconnected, the surface that attackers have to attack just keeps growing. We're making their job easier, and a lot of that can be dealt with through education, awareness, just thinking twice anytime you're about to click on something or open an attachment in an email or connect your device, your personal device, to your company network, or vice versa. Bring your work computer home and connect it. Just thinking twice is a huge step. And then beyond that, you know, there are technical controls that can be put in place that help mitigate the risks. But the most important thing is that people understand just how many possible things there are to be attacked, so that they can at least keep an eye. And you know, it's going to take all of our eyes to be able to do this. So in general, it's a pretty sad state. In a survey, I think this was by the Ponemon Institute, a third of respondents said their medical devices have vulnerabilities and malware that they're aware of. And I would say 2/3, the other 2/3, also have medical devices with vulnerabilities and malware. They just don't know about it yet. The thing I see in almost every case, especially with medical devices, is outdated firmware. And there's a big disconnect, you know, whether IT does that or whether ops does it or whether it's owned by the manufacturer. You know, there's a lot of issues that come into place. But medical devices are highly vulnerable in a lot of cases. I'm going to let you guys look at these stats while I tell you about something. I've been working with these two physicians out of University of California who are also, they help train and recertify surgeons and emergency department doctors. When they do these certifications and recertifications, what they'll do is they'll set up like a practice surgery room or emergency department room that they set up in, and they'll have an actor come in presenting with specific issues, and then eventually they switch that actor out with an incredibly sophisticated dummy, like a robotic dummy that, you know, has a heartbeat and its heart can stop and it can stop breathing, and they can try and resuscitate it without actually having to use paddles on a real person. So what these two doctors have done and what I've been working with them on is setting these exact same theaters up exactly like these physicians are used to doing, but we also have a group of hackers sitting outside that are attacking these biomedical devices. We've never had a trouble getting to one or causing it to do things it should not do. And in almost every case, everyone in that surgical theater is confused. They have no idea why it's happening, because from day one, every single medical professional is taught to trust their devices. Make sure they're calibrated, rely on your devices, and just, you know, keep your patient alive. And the fact that we can take over an IoT device these days, or a connected medical device, means that everyone needs to be aware. The threat is, it can reach into the surgery room. It can absolutely reach into anywhere that a device is connected. In the 3 cases that I worked with these guys on, we were able to kill the patient. I mean, it was a fake patient in all 3 cases with no trouble. We made the paddle stop working. We upped the infusion of drugs into a patient, which was supposed to take 2 hours, did it in 3 minutes. So in other words, it's a sad state and it's very scary. And IoT and connected devices that we're throwing on our networks as fast as we possibly can absolutely need to be thought about, and they need to be considered. And when something strange happens, you know, don't dismiss that as a possibility. So again, we're almost to the end here. How can everybody help? Helping, one of the biggest things that can help is to establish an overall corporate or enterprise-wide culture of security. You know, make it commonplace for nobody to hold the door open on a badge door for somebody else. Yes, we know it's polite. I do the same. I want to hold the door open for people, but you know, that's just one thing you can do. You know, teach people to not open an attachment that's not expected. So if you get an email, even from your boss, with an attachment that's not expected, does it really hurt to send them a quick IM or call them real quick on the phone and say, hey, did you send this attachment? Those kind of things are habits and culture that need to be in place. We also need to think, all of us, about our mobile devices on a daily basis. These, even your personal mobile device, we carry these with us everywhere. We use them for work often. And so having a nice long pin, using your biometrics to get into it are very important. And also, any modern device, you can encrypt the hard drive on it. It will not slow your device down. It will take a couple hours to set up. It's a very easy setting. You do not need to be a master of anything. You can Google it. It's like 6 steps and then a wait. Creating and maintaining strong security habits is important. Planning for the unexpected, so don't just be reactive, which is what most organizations are these days. They are waiting for something to happen and then they're going to react. Think ahead. Look for what could happen. Use strong passwords. When I say, I put on here no reuse, it's very, very, very important that you not reuse your same password that you use for Gmail as you use to log into your work account, as I'm sure you've heard. And if you can, if your work has it, use multi-factor, which there's multiple ways to do that. Be aware and control physical access. That's where I'm saying don't hold the door open for people. If somebody walks up and is like, hey, my badge isn't working, can you let me in? Tell them to go get their badge fixed. You know, don't just let them in, because that's how I get into all those pharmacies. And ask questions. Be curious and trust but verify. Human nature is not going to change. Insider threats are going to continue to grow. CIOs know that people are the issue. Most pharmacy thefts are insider fraud. They're work of insiders. Most, and I agree with these people, most feel that user awareness training is not working. And I agree. I do not think that awareness training has gotten to the level it needs to be. It's not personalized enough. But the better we can make it, the more effective it can be. And traditional compliance, so in other words, if you're HIPAA compliant, good, but you're not secure. I can stick it into your network. It does not matter. If you're compliant to any regulation, that is spectacular and a very good thing for your organization to do. But if any organization stops at compliance, they're not secure. An attacker can get in very easily. We have to take it to the next level. So, and insiders are responsible for a lot. Why do most of these hacks work? Because people are people, and people fall for tricks, and people are easily fooled. We want to believe that people are good. We want to believe that people are rational and and it's not always true. So we have to remember that. All right. So I think we ended up with a whole 5 minutes. If anybody had any questions. It looks like we didn't. I guess, Carrie, there was another poll question. We could pop that up. We did have one more poll question if y'all are still hanging out. And you'll see on here my email, my phone number, and my Twitter account. Please feel free to follow me. I'm constantly posting tips. Feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk. If something in here didn't make sense or worried you and you'd like more information, I will gladly point you in the right direction. And this question asks if you have a full-time CISO, which is a Chief Information Security Officer. And that is somebody who can help to actually strategize and run your information security program. It's going to be one of your biggest advocates and biggest helps. Good. It looks like a lot of you do have a CISO in place, which is a good sign. As we don't, we do work with a lot of organizations to help them supplement when they don't have a CISO. Well, I suppose if nobody has any questions, at least right now, I sincerely appreciate all of you attending. You are more than welcome to read our blogs. I have lots of them.
John?
Yes.
We did have a question come in. I do want to say before we get to the question that we will be sending out the slides and the recording after this session. So stay tuned, look in your emails. And then the question that came in is, what is the going rate for medical record numbers on the dark web?
So at last time I checked, which was about 2 months ago, it was $363 is the average going rate for a medical record. The average going rate for a credit card or even a complete financial history like an Equifax thing is roughly $2. So, and it's probably less right now. So that's what we're looking at. They're worth a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's all the questions we have.
Well, excellent. Well, once again, thank you all very much, and you have a great afternoon.